and we are very happy to have that we can present Derk-Jan van Heerden. After university, he started AELS, Aircraft End-of-Life Solutions. And when you talk about end-of-life solutions, you know that has something to do with circularity. Now he's with the Aethos Foundation, and that's he supports research for the recycling of aircraft materials. And his goal is to close the loop, I read on your website, which means that new planes will be made in the future from recycled material from old planes. Please, Derk-Jan, take the stage.
Okay. So he already told you guys what I'm going to present about, so now no longer required. But I will give my best attempt to learn you a little bit more. Here we go. I'm going to talk to you about aircraft that stop flying. And my presentation will explain to you what Aethos is doing, a little bit about what I've done, but also what are the challenges. Because I want to share not only with you what aviation is good at, but I also want to raise the questions. I also want to raise the challenges that we are confronted with, because I'm 100% sure that you will have solutions that aviation is not aware of. I'm also sure it's going to be the other way around. I might have some solutions for questions that you are not aware of yet, that we have already answered many years ago. And this is a great picture. Anybody has an idea what aircraft type it is? I just want to make sure what the aviation knowledge is within this group. 737? No, it's way bigger than that. No, well, it's a Boeing 777. Yeah, size does matter, right? We agree with that? Yeah, okay. Okay, true, yeah. So let me first tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in 1979, the 31st of December, so I'm from the 70s for 12 hours. And to be honest, I was born in Rotterdam. But I am a PSV fan. Is that okay? Is that acceptable, or is that an issue? But I only lived in Rotterdam for one day, and then I moved over to Oud-Beijerland. I'm not sure if some people know that small town. My mother was born there and a lot of family, and after that I moved to Brabant. But eventually I ended up studying aerospace engineering at the Technical University in Delft. And I did some end thesis on the subject, how to recycle an airplane. That was a subject nobody really has done before. There was also a sustainability note possible on my diploma that I wanted. And I got it, because next to the research I also wrote a business plan. Because it was pretty clear not a lot of was getting attention of how to recycle airplanes already. In 2005 there was a question, I was raising the bar. So I started a company called AELS, which stands for Aircraft End-of-Life Solutions. The idea was to help people who stop flying an airplane to do something with it, as good as possible. So I built that company for many years. I even joined AFRA, which is the Aircraft Fleet Recycling Association. I even became president of that foundation, where all the companies that are active in doing aircraft disassembly do it as good as possible. They share their challenges, they share their solutions, and trying to raise the bar in the safety of aviation world, but also the safety for the people who are doing the jobs, all the elements that are part of safety and making money, I guess, as well. Those were the discussions we had in part of that group. But because of a reason, I stopped working for AFRA, because after 9 years in the board, where you officially were allowed only to be there on 6 years, I was already illegal president, I guess. But I also left AELS, and then now I started a foundation called Aethos, and I'm going to share you more about what we're trying to do there. We're trying it, we're doing it, actually, to be honest, yeah. So what is Aethos doing? Aviation is very good in reusing of components. I will share a little bit more about that later on, but that works pretty well. Some airplanes stop flying, and then parts are removed to keep other airplanes airworthy. Safety and all those elements are part of those challenges, but we can do that. Then there is repurposing. Somebody has an idea what that means? We've got somebody ready.
Yeah, just using the component in a different purpose than it's originally designed.
Correct. And in aviation, a lot of people think that aviation, I have a piece of an aircraft at home which is designed into a table or they even do it professionally, as in the cockpits are removed. That's why you saw in that picture you missed the cockpit, because that cockpit will now be used to build a simulator to train the pilots. Because if you are training to fly an airplane instead of flying an airplane, it's cheaper, obviously one of the main reasons, but also better for the environment, because flying also consumes a lot of kerosene. And then there's recycling. That means recycling is all the materials that are left after everything that can be reused and everything that can be repurposed is removed. And that is where Aethos is working on. We are trying to raise the bar on the materials that are left after everything that is removed for reuse and all the creativity for repurposing has been done. And there is a reason why it's a foundation, because there is not enough money challenges, money options, as in making money about recycling an airplane. Yes, there is a little bit, but raising the bar will cost money, and therefore the foundation is required to figure out ways to do that. The car industry already made a lot of steps. And yes, in the old days, maybe those car manufacturers were thinking we're going to recycle our own cars, but they figured we need to combine it because we need to increase the weight, and the more weight we have, the cheaper it becomes. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to explain to the aviation world, okay, you're now stopped flying an airplane, these options are there, what are you willing to do? Are you willing to dump the stuff, or do you want to maybe avoid waste being dumped, in maybe some cases even illegal? Let me explain a little bit about how aviation works. There is a new airplane. Currently there are two big builders, Airbus and Boeing, and they make an airplane and those get older, right? They fly and fly. Somebody has an idea how old airplanes average are getting before they stop flying? I'm guessing it's pretty similar to the shipping industry, but I'm not sure. 25-ish. So yeah, depending on the model and depending if there is a cargo conversion where the passengers are transferred into a cargo, and that maybe extends lives. Some other aircrafts are less interesting to do that. But yeah, so that's probably pretty much similar to windmills as well, I guess, right? A lot of windmills will probably be somewhere in around 25 years. At least I've been told. I'm not sure that's correct. But when they get older, an airline will say, I will stop flying this airplane because I ordered a new one, or because I went bankrupt, or because they decided they needed a bigger one, or all different reasons can be there. And then a decision needs to be made. And depending on how old the aircraft is, but also where the aircraft is in its maintenance cycle, then a decision can be made. And maybe somebody would say, I want to have the airplane, I want to keep on flying it. And that happens very often. Airplanes keep traded all the time between airlines because someone needs extra airplanes because they have issues with another aircraft type or whatever the reason is. However, also the decision is made that the airplane will stop flying and then it needs to be disassembled. With disassembly, I mean the removal of parts with the intention of reusing them. And those parts need to be managed. And in aviation, there is a lot of legislation demand to make sure that airplanes don't crash. And that means that there are several parts in an airplane that are at least 3 same components in there, because if one breaks down, you still have 2 working. Pressure systems, there's always tripled pressure systems. There are certain elements in there which are limited to only 1. So that's why those are always extra heavy, extra strong, to avoid them, because if they break, you have an issue. In the old days, a lot of airplanes had 4 engines, because if one engine breaks down, you still have 75%. These days, a lot of them have 2 engines. If then one breaks down, you only have 50%. But the development of the engine itself increased so much that now you have a lot of airplanes with 2 engines, because in that way, the weight of the airplane goes down, fuel consumption goes down, and that is also a big advantage. So that's what I would call reuse. The reusing of parts is very well developed, and we're proud of that. But there's also stuff that's always left. Because if you remove all the parts, you remove the computers, you remove the landing gear, the engines, all that stuff that can be reused to keep other airplanes flying, there's always something left. And you saw the picture already. That's what we call dismantling, because that requires the splitting of some hazardous materials need to be removed. There needs to be, the size needs to be reduced, because otherwise it stays where it is, because melting the aluminum, for example, requires it to be small enough so that you can sort it. That's the next step. So the material that is removed after an aircraft is disassembled, it's chopped, and then those materials are brought somewhere, and then they will try to sort it, and then a next process starts. In the best world, that would mean those materials are then melted to build another airplane. That's what I would call recycling. The big difference, however, is the value. Does anybody has an idea how old no, probably not, but anybody has an idea how old an airplane is? No, nobody bought an airplane once? So on the reuse side, I will share a little bit more about it later on, but there is roughly 95 to 99% of a project when an airplane stops flying is made in the reuse market. And only the metal side is very limited to it, just a few percent of the total revenue when an airplane is disassembled. And one of the big issues is that close to nothing is really recycled. And I like the word recycling, meaning that you melt it or you do something with it that creates the same product again. And in aviation, that's extremely difficult, because the demand for the quality of the material is linked to not recycling the material, because that recycling gives you no guarantee of the quality of the material you are using, which is not totally true, depends a little on the material you're looking at. But that's why I like to refer that a lot of material from aircraft are downcycled. And yes, the word downcycling sucks, as in I hate the word as well. I'm trying to figure out another word, but it helps me explain people that the aluminum of aircraft don't end up making new aircraft. It's downcycled and it's created in something new. And that has several reasons. One of them, for example, is that a lot of different alloys are used and they're attached to each other, and that makes it very difficult to separate it. But next to downcycling, some stuff we can do nothing with, and then that is incinerated. But for example, who's familiar with carbon fiber, CFRP? I will discuss a little bit later on, but I see some hands going up. Yeah, of course, you know glass fiber, right? The carbon fiber is aviation world. These days, some of those waste is just disposed of and follows the same route as all other waste, and therefore it goes into an incineration process. However, it's a negative incineration profit, as in it will cost energy to burn it. It doesn't bring any energy. It doesn't bring any positive something. So in theory, that means landfilling is the only solution. So yes, it's fantastic that we now have airplanes that fly from carbon fiber, reinforced plastic, CFRP material, but what will we do with those airplanes when they stop flying? And we're getting close to the first one being disassembled and dismantled afterwards. Any questions so far? No? Okay, I'm doing a good presentation, apparently. I'm happy. So why is recycling not important? Because the question is, if I design an airplane, what will I be doing to make sure that the product, the airplane, is doing what it needs to do? And I'm guessing it's the same story when designing a windmill, is that you are considering a lot of different challenges. It needs to be cheap, it needs to be it needs to be working correctly for a long time. It needs to be safe. In aviation, always one of those important things, as in we want to avoid an airplane to crash as much as possible, preferably not at all. And that means that the people who are designing airplanes, as far as I know, I only met one person working at Boeing who was looking at the recycling of the materials, but it was one person of a team of 150,000 people. So it's not very important decision process element in designing an airplane. And that is, I don't agree with that, as in it should be part on the same decision process, as in I'm building an airplane, and yes, if you decide to build it in such a way that recycling is not possible, that is okay, but then you need to explain why it is, for safety, for lowering the weight so that the fuel consumption goes down. Those are very good reasons, but that also means that the companies who are actively disassembling and dismantling airplanes, they don't get punished for not being able to recycle them, because the decision of what material was made happened 25 years before that airplane was manufactured, and in some cases even 40, 50 years ago when the first airplane of that type was made. So let me explain as well why the recycling of airplanes is also a challenge to do it, let's say, to the standards. Because where do you think most airplanes go when they stop flying in Europe? Will they stay in Europe or will they be flown somewhere else? Sorry? Yes, correct. USA wins a lot of projects, and that has two reasons. One reason is they fly all airplanes more often than we do in Europe, and they have more demand for older aircraft parts, but they also have a lower demand on how to treat the safety of the people who are doing the work, but also how to deal with the waste materials, and that brings extra cost. So that's what I want to share with you a little bit as well. So my old company bought airplanes to sell those parts, but in some cases we will not be able to pay enough money for the seller. So they said, look, I will fly the airplane now somewhere else because they're going to pay more than you are, even though the extra cost of the flight is less than the extra money I'm going to get for the airplane. So that's why I'm sharing this with three aircraft types. On one side, you've got a relatively new one, meaning that a lot of those spare parts are demanding to keep the same airplanes flying. Then, for example, an aircraft type, roughly 50% is already stopped flying. A lot of those spare parts are available. And then the demand is lowered. And there's also this option of not being able to reuse those parts because it was part of an accident or the records are incomplete and therefore the material can't be reused. To give you an idea about the cost of the disassembly, so the more parts you remove, the more you pay, but also the dismantling. And with dismantling, I mean preparing for the recycling. And funny enough, the more parts you remove for reuse, the cheaper it becomes to recycle it, because there's more of the same material and less strange things are installed. For example, a few of the parts I will mention later on, some materials have hazardous materials in it. If you remove them for reuse, you don't have the waste problem. So that's why the older the aircraft type is, the more already are disassembled, the cost of the dismantling increases, even though the cost of disassembly decreases. But what will happen with the value? Because that's also important. And this is a very important indication. And I'm referring to an airframe without the engines, because the engines have a different life cycle, and therefore airplanes that typically are disassembled have engines that are very good to reuse, and that is also influencing the value. But you have airplanes, when you are buying one of the first 777s, or you're buying a 787 or an A350, then you pay way more for it, because there is a way more demand for those spare parts as well. In some cases, you might be the first one to disassemble one, meaning you are the only alternative provider of those parts except to the OEM. And that means that you can maybe even sell those parts for more than they are selling it, because your delivery time is much faster than certain OEMs can be. And then the material value is way lower. But the more aircraft that are disassembled of a specific type, the lower the value of the parts are. And then there's way more a balance between the metal value or the material value versus the parts value. And that's the reason why a lot of airplanes are sent away from Europe to a place where they have a better control over the cost. Because if you are disassembling an airplane and it would cost 150 instead of 100, it doesn't matter as much if it's worth more than 5 million. Because selling those parts, you are maybe even closer to the market. And in some cases, somebody has an AOG. Somebody knows what AOG means? No. Okay, I'm not in the aviation world. AOG means aircraft on ground. So then there's an incident or something is broken and they need a spare part directly. And then you get extra money for it. So that's why all newer airplane models, disassembly within Europe, it happens very good. But the moment the value decreases, all of a sudden the buyers that have cheaper solutions because they are not obliged to treat the waste in a good way, gives them extra lower cost, and as a result they can pay more for the airplanes. And here's the number where you can see that it can be a very gigantic product where you can make good money on, or it can be much more challenging. And in some cases, and that's why in certain countries you see airplanes parked in the corner, nothing happening to it, because it costs the owners to get rid of. So if you go to regions that are a little bit more poor or less focused on the environment, you will land there and then you'll see, hey, why are there 10 airplanes here that look broken? That's because it will cost money to get rid of. And there are also countries where then all of a sudden, and when I was buying airplanes as well, I got calls from one location in Saudi Arabia I get a call roughly once every 3 months because somebody said, I have the exclusive right to sell these airplanes. And then I said, what are you selling? I'm selling you 747-200s. You probably don't know the model, but that's an old one. And I said, okay, how much money are you willing to give me so that I will clean it up? But they thought they were selling something that makes money. So as a result, those airplanes are parked there for many, many years because they think it's an airplane, so it's worth money. No, in some cases, it will cost you money to get rid of. I got 5 minutes left, so I need to speed up. Thank you so much. Aircraft end of life. So the decision is a financial one. That's why airplanes are flown somewhere else instead of a location where the environmental performance is done correct. Reuse is a global market. So if I buy an airplane, doesn't matter where, because I will sell those airplanes also all over the world. But recycling is done local. And that means that the local legislation might raise the bar, bring extra cost, and as a result, the airplane owners will say, I'm not selling it to you because they are willing to pay more because they have less cost. So there are some other issues that I won't discuss too long on, but who is familiar with the decision of waste? We see somebody raising his finger. Yeah. So who knows the transport of ships to India? There is some, recently were some issues on that. It's illegal to transport waste. But the whole question is, when is something officially waste? And for some strange reason, aviation is successfully ignoring those standard rules. Because in theory, if an airline decides to stop flying an airplane, and they know that's going to be disassembled, they're transporting waste. And transporting waste requires extra paperwork. Nobody has ever done that. And that's why also this foundation is here to maybe prepare the aviation world as in, okay, maybe we need to know a little bit better what type of materials are in there and how to recycle it and how to deal with it. Let me go to the next slide. And one of the reasons why I'm sharing this with you as well is that raising the bar for recycling aircraft materials is that the quantity is very low. Just to give you an idea, we're talking roughly about 800 aircraft annually, which is close to nothing, right? And then a lot of the material is going in through the reuse side. Then there is some materials that can definitely not be recycled. So the total weight of the materials that are recycled, the metals, is roughly 16.8 tons per year. But if you then look at the amount of global what is being recycled, you're looking at way more number, or a higher number of the material that's being recycled. As a result, aviation is only 0.042% of the total metal that is recycled globally. And yes, we are active in aluminum, and aluminum is less of the total. So if you would include that, let's first make a step as in, let's assume we recycle everything, then it's still nothing. But if you would include, only focus on aluminum, then it's also 0.05%. So yes, aviation should be focusing on doing it better, but the question is, are we important enough for the recycling world to consider we are willing to help you to improve the way you are recycling airplane materials? Then there are also a lot of special materials. And there are a few here. Who's somewhat familiar with Chrome 6? I'm guessing some people are confronted with it now as well, because there are some news. In the Netherlands, we are dealing with Chrome 6 in a very special way. But aviation airplanes are still being painted with Chrome 6 paint on it. What can be done with it? CFRP, of course, is also an important material in the new aircraft these days, because, yeah, what are we going to do with that? It might end up in landfilling, and that is very comparable with windmills. And I'm knowing you guys are not active in the windmill itself, all the stuff that are helping those machines. But yeah, what are we going to do with it? And Aethos is, to be clear, only focusing on solving the solutions of the materials that have been produced many years ago already. So we're not trying to tell them, you made this part of that material, maybe you should make it now from this material because then it's better recyclable. No, we are trying to help them to say, okay, you've chosen this material, maybe we can do this, and then the performance and the solutions are better. That's what we're trying to do, and that is we're making steps. We've done our first researches, and that will be reported soon, including one that we're just measuring how much the recycling rate is, because also there a lot of companies are saying we are recycling airplanes and we do 95%, and then you ask them, how did you calculate it? Yeah, well, maybe we did a little bit like this. So this is what we're doing. We are focusing on helping the recycling world being better in understanding what aviation can bring, but also learn the aviation world how they could better recycle. And to be clear, if we find a solution that will cost money, it will probably never be developed, because then people don't want to do it. So we only solutions that are either making some money so somebody can see I will invest in it because I will make some money out of it, or it needs to be at least a similar solution from the money point of view. That's it. How much late?
Very good. Thank you.
I had no questions.
I have a lot of questions.
Oh, you? Okay, I'm lucky. Thank you for that, because I was
I
worried
think they might have some questions as well. Yeah. I was just wondering, do airlines sell airplanes, and then other companies like your old company, they will try to reuse and recycle the materials? Do Airbus and Boeing also buy recycled materials for their new planes? Or is that not the case yet?
So the closed loop that I was showing is close to not there. The only route might be on engine parts with special metal alloys in there. That might be possible to close loop, because also those parts are relatively easy to separate, and then it's just one metal, meaning that melting it results in the same stuff you use to make that part. Yeah. And also, to be clear, the manufacturers demand virgin material, as in they don't want it to be recycled, because they are worried that the recycling route will pressure the quality. Okay. As in they are demanding, for example, so many alloy metal as part of the mix, but they said 1%, but it can't be 1.001, it needs to be 1. Okay. And that, the aviation simply doesn't want that, so far. Okay. Let's hope they make steps.
They will change, or maybe the recycling process will improve so that it fits those standards?
They do research here and there, and then the question is, are they doing the research because it gives them the opportunity to show the world that they are also focusing on recycling, or are they really trying to find a solution for a challenge? Okay. And my guess is a little bit of both.
Okay. Okay. I thought David had a question. David Molenaar?
Yeah, one question. You mentioned about carbon in your blades or your wings. If you could give an advice to the wind industry, and you can only make bigger rotor blades by using carbon, or you can stay to the current design and not using carbon, what is your advice for the future?
The fact that aviation moved away from aluminum to carbon fiber makes a lot of sense, because as a result, the weight of the airplane is dropping 30%, and therefore the fuel consumption is decreased. So the total environmental gain is significant. But as a result, there is no solution for carbon fiber. I personally am more in favor of making a decision based on the total picture, not only on the recycling. And I'm sure that with windmills, it might be similar, as in making them bigger, makes them more efficient, and then during that duration, the environmental gain is higher than the environmental loss, because at the end, there is nothing you can do with this stuff. And that said, we can also be creative. So there are research being done to figure out something with carbon fiber, but it's not, per definition, it's not recycling. It's always downcycling, because you are cutting up the fiber. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'll hold it. What's your name?
Nina Fielenkallio. Super interesting presentation, because we're setting up something similar for the wind industry. So a lot interesting insights that you gave. One question, at this moment inside this system is not the reuse and the financial gains that come from the reuse part. You are only focusing on the recycling. Would it be an idea to also include those loops so that you can use the financial gain that you get from the reuse part to also finance the recycling side, which is more difficult?
So the company I founded, ALS, is doing that. So they're trying to buy an airplane as cheap as possible and then sell those parts as high as possible, and then they find a solution for the materials. But these days, the reason why I started the foundation is to help the companies that like ALS, because the amount is so low and the cost, and it just consumes time, and therefore they're not giving any focus on raising the bar there. And that's why the foundation is here, just to get everybody who is active in aviation to better understand it. So yes, if I was aiming on building a company that can make money, then I would definitely focus on the reuse side. But the foundation only has the goal to raise the bar from an environmental point of view, and to bring people in discussions and also let them know a little bit more about the material they might now be dumping. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to hopefully also train the mechanics that they realize that they are now throwing all the plastics in one bucket, but that they realize, okay, I need to throw this piece in that bucket and this piece in that bucket, because then there can be something done better with it.
Yes? There's another question. What's your name?
Nicole
Okay.
Dekhoff.
I'll take-
Hi, Derk-Jan.
Hello.
So I am very interested specifically in the waste management aspect of the aviation world, because I think a lot of focus has been on hydrogen and electricity, and now we are seeing with, for example, that they are taking 5 to 10 years longer than expected for hydrogen flights. And I just feel like Airbus and Boeing, they keep focusing on trying to reduce the emissions of the flight itself, which I understand it's like the largest part, but I feel like if they were to change a little bit more into the waste, because when we look at the LCA, of course, kerosene is really big on the emissions, but as you mentioned, if they try to make more homogeneous products, maybe it can also help them discover something that is, for example, carbon fiber, it is lighter, but then the environmental impacts at the end, it's kind of beating
It's still
itself
there.
up. Yeah, so do you have any ideas, for example, legislation-wise, or how can they improve as well to try to get the big companies from producing the aircraft themselves to try to homogenize their production?
Good question.
How to go to sustainable aviation?
If you feel that we should stop flying with fuel, then that is close to impossible. And yes, aviation is lowering the amount of fuel being used per passenger, but the amount of passengers is growing faster than, and as a result, the impact is increasing. Add to that there are different areas where they are reducing. So where aviation is now a few percent, if everybody stops flying on fuel or operating on fuel, then aviation will be getting to 10, 20, 30% of the total. Yes, there is research being done to maybe fly electric or other better opportunities. That is basically an other market, so there's not a replacement, because flying electric from here to New York, forget about it. That simply, at this moment, there is no technological solution to do that. I'm very interested to understand what are the options and to try to push it. But aviation should be feeling more responsible and make a gain somewhere. And that's why also this foundation is important, because aviation can say, look, we are now flying an airplane that is now recently built, it's still using fuel, and we need to fly it at least 25 years. So introducing new technologies will not benefit for the next 30, 40 years, but at least we are now going to focus on cleaning as much as possible with the materials that are left, just to lower a little bit of the impact that aviation is responsible for.
Thank you, thank you. Regulation is very interesting, of course, but that's more like a political discussion than a...
Yeah, so
recycling
yeah,
discussion.
the regulation challenge will be, you need to make it global. There are a lot of stories of that. We in Europe or in the Netherlands, we want to raise the bar and do it better, but as a result, as the cost will increase, the business might go away. So yeah, I strongly believe that if this is the standard in Europe, we need to do this, but if by legislation we're going to make it like this, then the business will disappear.
Looking at the clock, Derk-Jan.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Do you... No, that's
I'm just
my,
so
that's my
interested
job.
for
You
everybody
don't have
that
to apologize. That's
they
my
keep on
job.
asking questions.
Do you have some advice for these people? They are thinking about and working on reusing equipment. Do you have some advice based on your experience in the aviation?
So reuse in aviation works very well because getting an airplane airworthy, you need to have the design approved in advance. And therefore changing the design will cost extra money because that also means you need to get it certified, you need to test it. And that's why, for example, the battery analysis we've done shows that a lot of aircraft are still flying on battery types that are not being used anywhere else anymore, but aviation is still using it because those are certified. So
they don't want to go through the hassle of redesigning stuff because you need approval.
And then there's also the opposite, that the company who is making it is making money, so why would they invest in something else if they have the ownership of that intellectual property and therefore they can make the business? So why would I do that?
And how do you turn that into advice for this community?
Well, my suggestion would be to think about a system that is locking the bar. So that, yes, for the next 10 years, the windmills need to be this size, this system, and then, because then you will have a lot of those being manufactured, and then the reuse or the repair process becomes easier and doable. That said, if you have 500 mills that are the same, repairing it becomes easier, therefore they can be used longer, and that also means reuse can be done easier. Because the first one that is 25 years old means that another one is only 15 years old, and then those parts can be then reused. But if you keep on changing the design or alter it a little bit, then you will have a headache. But in aviation, there is a legislation push behind it that is creating.
We like that in the offshore sector.
You like aviation?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's cooler than.
That sounds like good advice, but we have to work out how to apply it to this to the offshore sector. Thank you very much, Derk-Jan. Give him a big round of applause.